You're listening to Puma Podcast.
I think yung EDSA Puera ad was really intended to mobilize people to support the charter change. Kasi tatlo yung key messaging doon agriculture, education, at walang pumapasok na foreign investment sa Pilipinas. Di ba nakalagay doon zero foreign investment?
Let us call a spade, no? Malinaw naman na hindi lang economic yung agenda dito sa charter change, whether people's initiative or call us, no? Malinaw naman na malalim at malawak yung political agenda rito. The very fact na susuportahan ba ito ng mga LGUs, susuportahan ba ito ng mga congressmen, entails a political agenda. At usually, yung political agenda dyan ay either lifting of term limits or term extension.
This is Puma Podcast and you're listening to Taga Taga News. In this episode, we hear from former Finance Undersecretary Cielo Magno and former Presidential Advisor on Political Affairs Ronald Llamas. They help us break down new motivations, strategies, and potential consequences surrounding fresh attempts to amend the 1987 Constitution. You might have seen it already, the television commercial that used the EDSA Puera wordplay to advocate changing the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines. The ad inundated primetime television at the start of the year and was seen by millions of Filipinos. It was clear that the goal was to inspire broad support for charter change, but the ad took on a lot of flack for attacking the legacy of the 1986 People Power Revolution. According to the ad, the 1987 Constitution encouraged monopoly instead of land ownership of foreign investors and failed to deliver on its promise of providing quality education. It also criticized the charter for allegedly disproportionately benefiting businessmen instead of farmers. The ad also blamed the charter for the country getting practically no foreign investments. Economist Cielo Magno says that's not right.
Well, yes, the Constitution did not change, but over the years, we've adopted several policies that have liberalized the sector. And through policies, nagawa na natin yun. So, I am not seeing the need to amend the Constitution kasi dalawa na lang yung naiiwan dun liberalization ng education sector and liberalization of mass media.
In the regular attempts to change the Constitution, the desire to address economic challenges and attract foreign investments is almost always brought up. Proponents argue that amending certain economic provisions in the Constitution can make the Philippines more business-friendly.
Ang limitation na to is because of the interest of the public. Pumapasok dyan yung issue ng national security. So binibigyan, in fact, if you read the Constitution, binibigyan ng flexibility ng Constitution ang Congress to define kung ano tong mga sektor na dapat ilimit. Liberalization of mass media is a critical component to attract foreign investment and pursue development in the Philippines. Liberalization of education sector, I don't think it will help solve the problem of our public education system. Diba? It may provide the middle class and upper class more options in terms of competition if we're going to have foreign-owned private schools in the Philippines.
The focus is often on restrictions on foreign ownership of land, public utilities, and certain industries. Proponents believe that easing these restrictions can stimulate economic growth by encouraging more foreign direct investment.
Yung sa foreign investment, nag-react din ako doon dahil ang dami ng initiatives to liberalize the different sectors of our economy. Panahon pa ni Duterte, ang dami niyang pinirmahan. Foreign Direct Investment Act of 2022, Retail Trade Liberalization Act of 2022. Then we have the Public Service Act of 2022. And then last year, the Department of Energy issued an order explaining that renewable energy projects can be 100% foreign-owned. So ano pa ba yung sektor na hindi na-open sa foreign investment, 100% foreign investment.
So it's primarily framed as a strategy for economic development. But how is this process initiated and what are the proposed changes? Pakinggan natin si political analyst Ronald Llamas the presidential advisor on political affairs to the late President Noynoy Aquino.
In less than 2 years, practically in 1.5 years, yung tatlong modes of changing the Constitution na ilagay sa lamesa. Last year yung CONCON, ngayon yung People's Initiative, in between those two ay yung CONAS. Hanggang ngayon yung CONAS pinag-uusapan. So tatlo yan in 1.5 years. Ikalawa ay last year, yung CONCON hindi sinuportahan ng presidente. Sabi niya ay hindi priority, wala sa timing, at kinontra ng Senate President. Kaya namatay kagad.
Those were supposed to be the 3 ways the Constitution could be amended. The process involves 2 main stages, proposal and ratification. Under a constitutional assembly, elected delegates deliberate and propose amendments. There's also a constitutional convention, where members are appointed by the president, and under a people's initiative, citizens gather signatures to petition for a specific amendment. But the People's Initiative that we saw proposed that the Senate and House vote jointly as a constituent assembly. Ibig sabihin, the Senate and its 24 senators would essentially have the same votes as the House and its 316 members.
Ang gusto ko lang sabihin, charter change is neither good or bad. Dahil ang charter naman talaga, dapat yan regularly pinag-aaralan dahil it should be a living document, no, na binabago as we go along, no, batay sa gusto nating maabot at batay sa tingin natin mga problema ng bansa. Halimbawa ako sang-ayon ako sa shift to a federal system. Sang-ayon ako sa shift to a parliamentary system na tingin ko mas superior kaysa sa kalukuyan nating sistema. Pero kailangan mo ng political at saka economic reforms bago mo yan baguhin.
Even then, it's just not as simple as picking one option and then running with it. Each method has its own advantages and disadvantages, and the manner of voting in a CONAS, for example, can be a contentious issue. Some argue that CONAS is more democratic as it directly involves the people's representatives. Others worry about the potential for political maneuvering and vested interests to hijack the process. The People's Initiative, on the other hand, empowers ordinary citizens to drive change. But gathering enough signatures can be a daunting task. There were even reports that voters were being offered 100 pesos in exchange for their signatures in the People's Petition. A few congressmen were even reportedly named as the ones pushing for the petition in their respective provinces. And for Ronald Llamas, the crux of the matter is that there's so much at stake if we end up changing our constitution without studying it first.
Kung mag-federate ka without the proper requirements or timing, you will just be federating warlordism. You will just be federating inequality. You will just be federating poverty. So, inulit ko, charter change itself is neither good or bad. It depends on several factors, several variables na kinakailangang maunawaan. Ang problema dahil kulang sa panahon, hindi na yan napag-usapan.
We're pausing for a quick break now. When we return, we ask, how close are we really to a new constitution?
It's not a priority for me. Maraming ibang kailangan gawin eh. There's so many other things that we need to do first that we can still do, we can achieve. Makukuha naman natin yung gusto natin, but within the present constitutional, the way the Constitution is written.
That was President Bongbong Marcos's tune on charter change just 11 months ago. You heard his words for yourself. It's just not a priority at this time.
The reason that it's being talked about is because of the economic provisions. And gusto nga natin magkaroon ng investment. Kung minsan sagabal yung, alam naman ninyo yung mga issue dyan, yung mga ownership ng corporation, ownership ng lupa, po, gano'n. But for me, lahat itong mga pinag-usapan, kaya natin gawin na hindi palitan ng saligawanas.
The debate intensified recently after House Speaker Martin Romualdez said in December that House lawmakers would again push for amendments to the 1987 Constitution and focus on relaxing restrictions that prevent foreign ownership. The lower house has since passed a resolution urging for a constitutional convention. For a time, the Senate remained divided, and President Marcos Jr. had not shown strong support.
The President agreed with us that the proposal was too divisive and asked the Senate to instead take the lead in reviewing the economic provisions of the Constitution. In this way, we can preserve our bicameral nature of legislation.
Eventually, the Senate came up with a manifesto rejecting a people's initiative for charter change. That matters because
Pero yung isa pang hurdle diyan ay yung kung ano yung magiging posisyon ng Senate. Dahil ang alam ko ay hindi pa yan tumaabot ng 2/3. Yung mga gusto or open by whatever form na baguhin yung konstitusyon, hindi pa sila nakakamaster ng 2/3.
unlike in Myanmar and Thailand, where proposals to amend the constitution are often aimed at eroding the power of the military, in the Philippines, the push for charter change, as it is also known, has always been instigated by politicians in power, seeking to remove election term limits. And Ronald Llamas says that's something we're missing in the discussion today.
At usually, yung political agenda dyan ay either lifting of term limits or term extension. No? Medyo bubunggo yan dun sa essence ng People's Initiative. Dahil yung People's Initiative, at least dun sa Lambino versus Comelec decision, ay dapat amendments, hindi revision. No? At yung term limits, yung lifting of term limits or term extension, that is a revision. Hindi yan amendment. No? So, pero sinasabi ko lang, malinaw na may political agenda rito. Dahil yung motive force, yung magtutulak nito, ay usually mga politiko. No? Kaya, syempre, what's in it for us?
Ultimately, the 1987 Constitution, a beacon of democratic hope, forged in the fires of the EDSA revolution, is back in the crosshairs, and the path forward remains uncertain. Public opinion polls show mixed results, with Filipinos divided on the issue. Ultimately, the fate of the Constitution rests in the hands of the people. And that leaves a few scenarios here.
Yung very dominant dyan kasi, kailangan nilang tapusin yan as soon as possible. Yun ang kalaban nila ngayon dito panahon. Yung signatures, sabi nila naka 6 million na, so mga 1.8, 1.9 na lang yung kulang, no? At isasambit sa Comelec, bagamat sabi ni Comelec Chair Garcia na yan ay kanyang pag-aaralan, mukhang kaya niyang sagutin yan with dispatch, no? At syempre, aakyat sa Supreme Court, no? Kung yan ay tatagal sa Supreme Court, baka dun siya mamatay.
Moving past the Constitution, the mere fact that the motif of the EDSA revolution was brought up again is an entirely different story on its own. We've always known that dissatisfaction with post-EDSA is brewing. It's one of the reasons Rodrigo Duterte's presidential campaign was so successful after all. But for Cielo Magno, it's worrying that these feelings are being capitalized on as a vehicle to move charter change forward.
Yeah, because in fact, the economic situation natin, medyo na ayos nung matapos ang Marcos administration after EDSA. Pero matindi pa rin ang kahirapan, di ba? Lumalala yung quality na education natin. Hindi natin nakikita yung lumalala ang traffic sa EDSA. Yung mga basic needs na hanggang ngayon hindi pa rin na-address. Pero yun nga yung sinasabi ko, nagkaroon man tayo ng EDSA, nagkaroon man tayo ng revolution, nagkaroon ng bagong konstitusyon, pero yung mga taong nasa gobyerno, parehas pa rin naman. Diba? Yung pagtingin natin sa politika, yung mga namumuno sa atin, yung sistema ng politiko at politika sa Pilipinas, hindi na bago ng EDSA. So, yes, valid yung feeling ng failure at disappointment after EDSA. And I think we should go beyond just looking at the Constitution, but looking at our institutions.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was written by Franco Luna and put together by Pidoy Blanco. Our Teka Teka News executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior editor is Veronica Uy. If you found this episode useful or interesting, share it with a friend. Help Teka Teka News reach more people and keep the show going. Thanks for listening.